Today we're going to start by looking at the theme of the Cask of Amontillado. So a couple weeks ago, you guys watched a video about how to determine the theme by asking yourself 5 questions about the story. So today we are going to answer those 5 questions. So as we go, follow along on your paper, and I want you to try to answer them for yourself as we go, and then you'll pause the video to answer them, and then with your teacher, you'll stop, discuss, and then go over the answers. So, the first question you want to answer is, what did the characters learn? So when you have 2 main characters, it's important to look at what both of them learned, not just one, because by looking at each of them, it shows different perspectives and can give and generate different theme statements. So take a minute and think about what our characters Montresor and Fortunato learned individually. So go ahead and pause the video and take a second to write. All right, hopefully your teacher paused the video, and now that you're done, go ahead and take a minute and discuss with your teacher in the class what you came up with for each of these characters. All right, hopefully you paused, and now we're unpaused. Let's talk about what the characters could have learned. So, some things that the characters could have learned for Montresor. You can become obsessed with getting revenge, because we saw that his whole life for 50 years, he told the story like it happened yesterday, 50 years later. So his whole life, his identity has become about this revenge. We could also put that revenge might feel good in the moment, but you might feel guilty later, because we did see a little bit of guilt at the end. Yes, he brushed it off, but it was still there, and he still felt the need to confess. So there's still a little bit of guilt. And for Fortunato, what he could have learned is, don't trust someone who you've wronged. He knows he wronged Montresor, but yet he trusted him. And maybe he also could have learned in the moments before his death that you don't insult other people, because there are consequences. So even though Fortunato died, he still, at the end, knew why he was dying. So we had, a few minutes that he could have possibly learned this. So if you need to, have your teacher pause the video and update your responses. All right. Hopefully you pause the video. Now that you've unpaused, let's answer the second question. How did the characters change and grow? So, you want to look at both characters again. Now, you want to dig deep. Look for little changes. Sometimes characters may not change in the story, and that's okay, because the author does it for a reason. They want the reader to see what happens when you don't change. So it's okay if a character doesn't really change, but I want you guys to really, dig deep and think about this. So go ahead and pause the video and take a minute to write. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and jotted down some of your thoughts. So if you and your teacher would like, you can pause the video again and discuss your answers with the class. All right, hopefully you took a minute to do that, but now that you've unpaused, let's go over some of the things that the characters might have learned. So how did they change and grow? Montresor, revenge overtook him. Some of these kind of overlap. And we saw that he changed. He might feel guilty now. At the beginning, we didn't see any sense of guilt. All of this, was him playing, he deserves this, he needs to pay. But at the end, we saw a little bit of guilt, maybe a little bit of remorse, because he confessed what he did. So that one might be a small change that we saw in him. That one might have been a little harder to get, but we did see it. Now, Fortunato obviously had a physical change from alive to dead, but we also need to look at his personality. So Fortunato didn't really change. You can kind of argue this either way. You can argue that he didn't change because that shows that there are consequences for your actions. But some people like to argue that we maybe saw a little bit of change, that he, his screaming, his kind of begging Montresor at the end, maybe saw his ego fade just a little bit, kind of letting down his guard, and his pride faded away. Then the fact that he was like begging and screaming for another man to let him go. So you could argue either way. Either he didn't change personality-wise, or there is evidence to support that he might have. So whatever, that one you can kind of do what you would like. So if you need to, go ahead and pause and update your paper if you need to. All right. Hopefully you had a chance to get down the information on your paper. And now I want you to answer the third question. Why did they act the way they did? So what drove Montresor to act the way he did? What drove him to get revenge? What about him caused him to act the way he did in the story? And same for Fortunato. What caused him to act the way he did? So go ahead and pause. Take a minute to write, and then when your teacher's ready, you guys can discuss it as a class. Okay, hopefully you guys paused the video, got some of your thoughts written down, and had time to discuss as a class. So now let's talk about what could have caused these characters to act this way. So, looking at Montresor, we know that Fortunato insulted him, which made him angry. So his anger, drove him to revenge. And he thought revenge was the only way to solve this. We learned this because of his family and the way his family handled, the way his family's crest was. We know that's how his family handles problems. So it stem back to his family and also his anger. For Fortunato, his pride, his arrogance, his ego, however you want to phrase that, that is what drove him to make the decisions he did. He let his guard down because he thought he was the best. He thought, he was never going to answer for any consequences because he was simply, above that. So that was what caused him to, trust Montresor and let his guard down. So take a minute, pause the video if you need to get this down. And then we'll move on to the next question. Okay, so moving on to our fourth question. What is different at the end of the story? So for this question, again, sometimes there's repeats, but that's okay because the more overlap you have in these questions, the more likely you're going to get a good solid theme statement that you can prove. So if you are afraid of overlap, that's fine, but there is something different. So go ahead and take a minute to write your response and then discuss with the class. Okay, now that you've unpaused the video, let's talk about this question. So hopefully you guys discussed that, Montresor was giving us clues that he might feel guilty for what he did because we didn't see that in the beginning. So you could also add the change of, now Fortunato has, paid for what he did, that Montresor was successful in getting his revenge. All of those can be added as well. But the main one, biggest change is in Montresor's personality. At the beginning, we see this guy obsessed with revenge. At the end, we see maybe a little bit of guilt. So go ahead and pause if you need and get that down. All right, and now we will be on our last question. So this one, I want you guys to answer on your own, but when you're answering what stays with you when the story's over, I want you to think about our topics. So what stays with you about pride? What stays with you about guilt? Sorry guys, my handwriting is not the greatest here. What stays with you about, trickery or deceit? What stays with you about, how you treat people? So all of those things I want you to think about. You don't have to do all, but at least one. Choose one of the topics that we talked about in the analysis assignment and think about what stays with you when the story is over. So go ahead and pause the video, take a minute, and then you can discuss with the class afterwards. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and had a chance to discuss and you all came up with some great ideas. But the point of doing this is because now we have some theme statements that we've generated. You can become obsessed with getting revenge. Revenge might feel good in the moment. Revenge can overtake your personality. If you don't change, there are consequences for having too much pride. We have guilt, guilt creeps in over time. We have all of these boxes give us a theme statement, especially this one. What stuck with you when the story was over? So you guys can also generate more than these, but I want you to choose, one or two theme statements. Maybe it's what you came up with for here, or maybe it's one of these. But I want you to pick one, probably 2 to 3 of these theme statements that you like the best to write down on your paper so that you have them for our writing assignment that we're going to do, where you're going to prove a theme. So go ahead, write a couple down. Your teacher can pause this video, and then when you're done, keep your paper. You're not going to turn it in anywhere, but it's for you. You need to keep your paper because it's going to help you with your theme statement for their writing assignment. Have a good day, everybody.